Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise is a research center at Lindenwood University whose mission it is to promote the understanding, benefits, nature, and importance of free private enterprise in our society. The Hammond Institute is an umbrella organization for three Lindenwood programs: the Center for Economics and the Environment, the Duree Center for Entrepreneurship, and Liberty and Ethics Center. Our guest today, this half hour, is Howard Wall, Chairman of the Economics Department at Lindenwood University and the Director of the Hammond Institute. Prior to joining Lindenwood in 2011, Dr. Wall was Vice President and Regional Economics Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis. Dr. Wall spent 10 years on the economics faculties at West Virginia University and the Birkbeck College, University of London. Had 2 stints as a visiting scholar at the Bank of Japan and was a Senior Fulbright Scholar at the Institute of Economics in Montevideo, Uruguay. Dr. Howard Wall?
I shouldn't have
You shouldn't have said that to me. That's a private joke we were talking about before we started this show. Excuse me. So, where I'd really like to start is back when I was just reading this introduction about you is, let's just start from the beginning. What is free private enterprise?
Well, free private enterprise is people, individuals, deciding what's best for themselves, and then in the collective of this, society is largely better off when it's left alone, and it's the spontaneous order that results from just the millions of interactions of people that happen every day without any overall guidance from above. You know, it's the invisible hand kind of operates, and there's not even a hand. It's just everyone working and making most people better off because of it.
Doing what's in an individual's best interest.
And they're only doing.
And there's everybody does this.
Everybody does this, and that's individual interest broadly defined. If your individual interest is to help others directly, then that's great. That's part of your own interest, and all of that interaction that happens, and we get a free and prosperous society.
So a simple example of this would be like you have a house that needs painting. You call some guys up and say, hey, come out and look at my house and give me an estimate. And you get at least 3, maybe 4 bids on that, and then you choose the people that you think are going to do the best job at the best price.
Right. And they paint your house not because they want your house to look nice, but because they want the money, because you think it looks nice, and it all works out just fine.
Right. And
you don't have to call a government agency of house painters to get it all an approved color. You just work it out between people.
Now, so free private enterprise, that's one side. Now, what's the opposite side of that coin?
The opposite side, probably the best word is collectivism. It's that we need to make collective decisions. We can't allow, it's too important to allow individuals to decide important matters like how much food to grow, the color of their house, things like that. And it's just, instead of collective decision making, you have individual decision making, and individual decision making comes up with better results than collective decision making very often, or most often. And that's kind of hard to grasp for some people. They think somehow a collective decision from above looks at everything simultaneously and can therefore decide what's best, but it's just not possible to account for the millions of decisions that are made every day. And so that's just an illusion that you can have this collectivism.
Now, when you use the word collective, all of a sudden it flashed into mind collective bargaining. Okay. Now, how is collective bargaining good or bad compared to individuals making their own negotiated.
Well, collective bargaining
decisions.
is a way of, so it's a group of people get together, a group of employees, and instead of each one going and negotiating with their employer themselves, the group appoints a representative to negotiate for all of them at once. And that's terrific if that's what works for the group, if they're voluntarily in that group to do that. And maybe that's beneficial to them, and that's great. And it's the question is whether you impose that as a requirement or whether you allow it.
Wait, when you say whether who's the you're referring
You
to?
meaning the government, not Lee Presser.
Okay, so yeah, but I'm just wondering who's doing the imposing of this collective bargaining. Prior to the 1930s, there was no such thing as collective bargaining in the United States, was there?
Well, there was collective bargaining. It was limited. I mean, people did get together and bargain, and sometimes employers did find it beneficial to just
to deal with the group rather than one-on-one.
Because it's very costly in terms of time. Mm-hmm. But the switch was to have more organized collective bargaining, and then also federal intervention to establish the parameters of it.
So what happened in the 30s that all of a sudden that changed to where there are laws on the books about collective bargaining?
Well, there was the Depression, and a lot of the view of the Depression was that workers needed help and assistance in having a stronger hand in negotiating with employers. And also there's not actually a bad unions and collective bargaining, not necessarily a bad thing, because it could be that the situation is that workers are at a very strong disadvantage. You could think of a coal mine in rural West Virginia. There's no alternative employment, right? So you don't have the competitive pressure that you get in other situations. Mm-hmm. Or even a large city like, say, Pittsburgh, where there's really a small number of enormous employers. Then the workers don't have the bargaining power that they need. So unionization and kind of government intervention to even enforce that can be beneficial. And that was, I think, what they found in the 30s. And whether it was always good or always bad, it was neither. It's a mixed bag. But then we get to where we are now, and it's a completely different economic landscape for workers.
No, at one point, unionization was, of all those who were working, was I believe in the high 30s percent-wise.
Yes, I believe so.
I can't remember the exact number, but 37% kind of came to my mind. I'm not sure if that's a correct number or not. But now it's down to some much lower number, isn't it?
Oh, it's well below 10%, and most of those, or more than half, are government workers, not private sector workers.
And based on economics, why did this go up and down like
well,
it did?
I think actually the need for unions is it has gone away to a large extent because the labor market for workers is just more open. There's a lot more mobility. People don't have just that one company that they can work for in a town. They have more options, and the competitive pressures do a lot of the work of what unionization maybe was required to do in the 30s. And on the other hand, employers learn to kind of deal with workers better, and with the way the industry works now, you also get more capital that's used instead of labor, so you're going to get a natural decline in the number of unionized workers in those types of industries.
Mm-hmm. Now, before you came on, I was reviewing a lot of information, and I saw online there was I don't know if you call it a debate or not, but a discussion between you and a union leader on a local St. Louis television station. And this union leader was making some comments about, I think you were talking about, what's it called, the
right to work?
Right to work, thank you very much. And he was saying that right to work does damage to labor, lowers the value of their work, and is just generally a bad thing.
Well, it would do damage to some workers, the ones who are now perhaps have an overly strong bargaining hand when dealing with their employers. And right to work is just a question of kind of balancing the bargaining power, because you have the collective bargaining, and then it's, well, how do you enforce or how do you establish the degrees of bargaining power? And right to work just loosens that bargaining power, because employees don't necessarily have to be a member of the union. So the union members will often declare that this is a disaster for workers overall, that it's unfair to the number of the workers who would be affected. But I don't think it's unfair to the workers who would be affected directly, because in some sense they have an artificially high wage, because their bargaining power is artificially propped up above what it is, for sort of the greater economic efficiency.
And what was this, during that discussion, there was mention of something called the free ride in right-to-work states. Explain what that is.
Right. Well, federal law requires that if you have collective bargaining, then you can't exclude employees from
who are not part of
the union from being part of that, the results of the collective bargaining.
The employers can't exclude them.
The union and the employers, right? It's all the employees are treated the same in collective bargaining, whether in the union or not. Mm-hmm. So from the union's point of view, they would say that, well, we're getting we're getting the benefits to these workers, but they don't have to join the union or pay the dues to do so. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, they are correct, but that ignores the fact that there are different degrees of right to work. You can have right to work where a person doesn't owe the union anything at all if they're not a member, and the other is that they might pay a fee for the negotiating costs. So they pay a fee for the administration of the collective bargaining, but they don't have to pay the entire union membership fee, and an awful lot of that money, of course, goes to political things or to other uses that a worker might not want.
So that's the objection, is they don't like how the money
they don't like losing the money.
Well, they don't. Yes, yes, but they also don't like how the money that is collected for union dues are being used.
The workers.
Yes, some of these.
So
workers.
So it's up to the worker whether the worker wants to do that, and also maybe they can get their benefits elsewhere, because sometimes the unions will be in charge of the benefits and other things that a person might not want.
So if you didn't join the union and not necessarily in the union health program.
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so you're the director of the Hammond Institute. Why don't we what is the Hammond Institute? And I know I talked about it in the intro, but from your perspective, what is the Hammond Institute, and why are you the director?
Well, I'm the director because I was already there. I was at Lindenwood at what was called the Institute for the Study of Economics and the Environment, which is now called the Center for Economics and the Environment. And we were in discussions with one of the Lindenwood University board members, John W. Hammond, and he had always had an interest in establishing something at the university about and promoting free enterprise and talking about free enterprise. So we talked about it for a while, and then he very generously gave us $1 million to set up the Free Enterprise, the Institute for Free Enterprise. And in thinking about how to organize the things that the Institute does, we wanted to draw on what the university was already doing, and that fell under this. Mm-hmm. So the Duree Center for Entrepreneurship had been around for a few years, and that's kind of the hands of the Institute, where actually teaching or helping people become entrepreneurs, so really get involved in private enterprise. Then there's the Liberty and Ethics Center, which is actually run by a philosopher who's now in the business school. And the Liberty and Ethics Center looks more at the overall human side of the free market and the implications of the free market on well-being and so on. And the Center for Economics and the Environment is kind of the research part, and I'm still director of that also. Mm-hmm. And primarily the Center for Economics and the Environment does research on, say, local economies, national economies, and I serve as kind of a resource for the media and others in the St. Louis area. I
was going to ask you, what do you hope to accomplish over a period of years?
Well, it's primarily through various forms of outreach. We're trying to just kind of either let people understand that free enterprise is part of looking out for our fellow man. It's often portrayed wrongly that free enterprise is about, profit. Profit is not what it's about. It's about making society as a whole better off. And so we have programs going along those lines, and just have probably a more informed debate about these topics, because often people talk about the free market without really understanding what's meant. There's a kind of a cartoon character that's drawn about it, and we're also, I guess, trying to change the language of the debate, where I think the term like social justice has been co-opted to mean a certain thing, which means government control over how things work, whereas we think social justice is more often achieved through individual behavior and market mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about free enterprise, it's in some respects I find that strange. Having grown up in America, it was defined to me what free enterprise was, and that in our country now, there's an argument to be going on as to what free enterprise is or means. It's like very strange.
Oh, it is.
It's like a redefinition of what it was that I thought I grew up knowing.
It's peculiar, and we're actually, it's been redefined in a couple of different ways from kind of both sides of the political spectrum. I think free market has often somehow become meaning pro-business, which is not necessarily pro-business, but people will say, oh, you need to be pro-business, and what they mean is you need to give some businesses some money and to help out specific businesses, and that in no way is a free market. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, it's that capitalism or free markets has led to all sorts of evil, and often they point to big business, and what big business says is free markets, which is actually crony capitalism, which is not, again, the same as free market. So I think we need to fight back, kind of from both sides on what it means to be free market. And like you say, that didn't used to be the case. And somehow, both left and, I guess we'll call it right, have kind of changed what freedom and liberty means in terms of our everyday interaction, not just in terms of economics, but also just in our interpersonal relations.
There was a Frenchman who knew George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and all those guys by the name of Alex de Tocqueville. He came to the United States, and he also wrote a book, I believe in the early 1800s, which has become a classic. But his description of American democracy has become, like, I guess, the keynote address of,
right,
of what American democracy is. But he also described America as a place of small businessmen, shopkeepers, farmers, people who were owning owning something and then being able to trade with others, and everybody in the community was in the business of doing something to create some wealth and then trade it to others for their wealth.
Right.
And then there was this back and forth motion, and that was the description of why America worked so well. What happened between that point when people owned their own, I call it owning your own life. When you owned your own life to where we are now, where most Americans are somebody's employee?
Well, you still, it used to be just agricultural, mostly, agricultural-based economy, and then the shopkeepers were all involved in some sense with agriculture and in the villages
providing
and so on.
Them with,
but the majority of people worked in agriculture. And then the Industrial Revolution, of course, kind of changed the nature of that. But you could still own your own life in the sense that you own your own skills, and then you can offer your skills to employers. But then it's somehow, I guess it was in the Great Depression or the Progressive era, where it became, prior to that, Teddy Roosevelt and then Woodrow Wilson, where it became the government's job to look out for you. And instead of just kind of providing charity or assistance, the view was that government had to take over your life to some extent. And it wasn't just providing you assistance when it needed, but also controlling what you did in return for providing you that assistance.
I don't think Americans understand what a fundamental change that was from the late 1800s into the early part of the 20th century.
Oh, it's just an enormous change. You know, people talk about during the Depression and FDR as the big change, but it really was with Teddy Roosevelt and then Woodrow Wilson in particular, who, you know, and Woodrow Wilson is held up as a kind of a liberal icon to some extent because of his progressivism, but he was also may have been the most racist and disgusting of our presidents.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, I mean, he
was really a vile
I don't even
character.
want to describe some of the things that he thought about the blacks that were even working for him in the White House. He was also president of Princeton,
yes,
at one time,
yep.
and didn't have much good to say about non-whites.
No, he was really a vile character.
And yet, like you said, he's held up today as some sort of an icon, because he had certain fanciful ideas about how government should relate to regular people.
Right, right. And, you know, an awful lot of the progressive ideas, a lot of progressive were racists, and some of the progressive policies that are put in place were to keep blacks in their place. And we see that through the 1930s, actually. So the progressive era, and it's odd that now liberals call themselves progressive, and if they look back at what actually a lot of progressivism was, they, well, if they were capable of shame, they should have some of that themselves.
Well, the 20th century was very transformative for the American way of life, especially when you think of how life was lived, say, after World War II, where America's industrial machine was really the last industrial machine untouched in the world. And so huge rivers of income were moving from the rest of the world towards the United States until about 1967 to 73. We were like the most cash-rich nation in the whole world at that time, probably ever. What happened to us since 1973? Now we're 17, just the government is 17 trillion in debt, and I understand overall commitments are something on the order of 100 trillion for various pension plans, et cetera, around the country.
Well, there are a few things that happened. One is, as we were kind of talking about before, was that the rest of the world caught up economically from where they were after the war, and that's a good thing. You know, Japan and Germany and, you know, Europe much richer than they used to be, and Russia, and now of course China. And so some of that is good. You know, another is that the fixed exchange rate regime of Bretton Woods collapsed in the early 70s. So we had kind of an artificially strong currency, and you know, we don't have that now. We're now much more at the whims of the global market than we used to. And then of course oil crises of the 70s. And, you know, all of those things could be fine, but I don't think we handled them well. We've run up, like you say, $17 trillion in debt. A great deal of that just in the last 10 years.
That's just the government we're talking about.
Yeah, that's just the government.
Federal government we're talking about.
Yeah, the federal government. And, you know, and the federal government is not that much different than everybody else in terms of debt, but the federal government does not seem accountable. You know, I'm accountable to my debt. The federal government is not accountable to anything, apparently.
We have about 5 minutes left here. Is there an area that you wanted to discuss that of interest to yourself?
Well, I think kind of the overarching theme of the research I do and when I go out and give talks or talk to the media is that it's a mistake to look at government as our economic savior, which is in some way the way things have evolved over time. And we've seen actually that to really take off in the last few years, that it's the government's job to make sure no one is worse off under any circumstance. It's often, well, how can we ensure that no one is harmed? And it's, well, you can't ensure that. But the government is not going to be your savior. Your government can be your master, which is quite a different thing. And there is a role for government to play, but it is not in saving us from everything that occurs. And because of this attitude to allow government to kind of step in and control things, well, first of all, they're not very good at it. They're incapable of knowing the entire economy. It's just too complicated. Even if they people in the government have the best intentions. Their intentions usually go awry because they don't understand that they don't know everything. And having worked at the Fed, I certainly saw an awful lot of that. When I study economics, I'm always amazed at how little I know after all the years I've been studying. Other economists seem to think that they're getting closer and closer to knowing everything. And I've found that to be
apparently they're not
disappointing.
old enough, because the older I get, the more I know I don't know.
Well, you should get a PhD in economics. That'll reverse that. You'll suddenly think that the little math problem you've just solved has solved the entire world for you.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we're $17 trillion in debt.
Which is why we're $17 trillion in debt, and after a few years of close to zero interest rates, there's no end in sight.
I want to, and I know you had something you want to talk about, but I just have to ask this question. How is it that the Fed has decided to make money virtually free? And to the point where if I have money in the bank, I can't invest it in an interest-bearing account because there's no interest. So as a matter of fact, my subdivision puts $11,000 into a money market, and every month we might see 65 cents on $11,000 interest.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that the Fed doesn't know what they're doing, quite frankly, and a part of it is a symptom of the economics profession that, like I say, macroeconomists think that their little toy model can solve things. And I think that they've lost sight of economics. Economics, to me, is about how prices send signals, and market prices, free market prices, send accurate signals. And those signals direct resources to their efficient uses, and that helps the economy to grow. The Fed and a lot of macroeconomists have somehow figured that they know better, and that somehow lower interest rates are always better for growth, whereas it's just a price. And I'll call them real economists or regular economists think that market prices are sending the right signal, and if you distort that signal, certainly to the extent that they had, then you're not going to boost the economy. You're going to have a drag on the economy, which I think has actually been borne out by the experience of the last few years. I think the Fed's quantitative easing has been a drag on the economy because of things like you say. It's not just the price to borrow money and send it out, it's, well, lenders don't receive money, and that's a distortion in the market, and that's why one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in now.
Just yesterday I heard, and we're really out of time, but just yesterday I heard that there's an enormous number of big banks in this country that simply aren't making money anymore.
Well, I think it's difficult to make money. It's not just the Fed, it's also the regulatory environment is very uncertain, and the Treasury seems to be holding large bank after large bank hostage and settling for billions of dollars for kind of vague violations of vague laws. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for banks because some of them should have been out of business a few years ago, but in terms of the system and the system working, it's not working very well.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. We're going to have you back because this is pretty interesting discussion.
I always tons of stuff to say.
Thanks. I've been speaking with Dr. Howard Wall. He is the chairman of the economics department at Lindenwood University in St. Charles County. We're going to be uploading this to YouTube, so if you would like to see this again or show it to your friends, just go to YouTube, look at Conversation with Lee Presser, Howard Wall. Thanks. Bye.